holy friends. We hope you had a wonderful Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, Sukkot, Shmini Atzeret, Simchat Torah, and everything else you may have celebrated in recent weeks. I don't know a lot of things, but one of the things I think I know is that you've never been to a class called Shalom Aleichem, a model for working with development trauma. And that's a great thing because we all have new things to learn from a master teacher, just an amazing topic and an amazing person, an educator. And I want to tell you about, just briefly, about Rabbi Lisa Goldstein, who is a teacher, consultant, and certified practitioner of NARM, a modality of healing complex trauma. She teaches a wide variety of online courses with an emphasis on spiritual wisdom, prayer and meditation, and the teachings of Rabbi Nahman of Breslov. She also works one-on-one to support people in their journeys of healing and spiritual growth. Educated at Brown University and Hebrew Union College, Rabbi Goldstein has almost 25 years of executive experience serving as the director of Hillel of San Diego and the executive director of the Institute for Jewish Spirituality. She's a faculty member for Jewish Pedagogies of Well-Being at M2, M Squared, a research program for master educators, and has helped create and implement online learning programs, including self-paced, highly produced courses. She lives in New York City with her husband, Igal Harmelin, and their foster son, Seydu. And on a personal note, I have been a student and friend of Rabbi Lisa Goldstein for a few decades now, having gone on a rabbinic delegation to Senegal and continue to be inspired by her and learn from her from afar and sometimes up close. So thank you for being here, and I'll pass it over to you.
Thank you so much, Shmuley. I actually think we first met, Shmuley, on the Hillel board when you were a college student, which is kind of amazing. And it's just such a zechut it's such a privilege to be with you and also to follow your extraordinary career from afar as a great, and from up close sometimes, as a great admirer. So, and I also just want to say hello to everyone else. I have some really good friends here, some of whom I haven't seen for quite a while, and there's some of you who I don't know, but I'm hoping that we will get a chance to converse and talk and do sort of this little exploration about how Shalom Aleichem, this song that so many of us are familiar with, is actually kind of an amazing model for working with developmental trauma. So I'm going to do this first part with a PowerPoint. So let me pull it up here. Let's see. There we go. Okay, can everyone see that? All right. So, so I wanted to start just by making sure that we're on the same page about this pretty extraordinary song that we sing on Shabbat evening. So Shalom Aleichem is based on the Talmud. It comes from Shabbat, and it has this image of someone coming home from synagogue on a Friday night and these two angels who accompany them home. And if everything is all set and everything is peaceful and there's a real sense of family closeness and everything is ready to welcome Shabbat, then the good angel says, let it be so the next Shabbat too. And the other angel has to say, so be it, amen. But if everything is a mess and the house isn't clean and food isn't prepared and everybody's arguing with each other and like it's a really sort of terrible situation, then the bad angel says, may it be so next Shabbat also, and the good angel has to say, okay, so be it. So we are welcoming in these angels through this very beautiful and repetitive chant, welcoming them in, asking for their blessings of peace, that we're looking for peace. We want to live in an environment, in a context of peace, of wholeness, of goodness, of well-being, of being well-fed, and of happy to be together. And so the theme of peace goes through the entire song. And so first we say, Shalom Aleichem, peace be upon you, O ministering angels. the angels who are messengers of the Most High. The traditional language is, the sexist language of kingship, but there's actually something very powerful about using that metaphor, which is pointing towards power, like the greatest power of the universe. That these angels are messengers of that tremendous power of the Blessed Holy One. And then we're inviting the angels in, come in peace, like enter into our space in peace. And then we say, bless me with peace. And then we can say, okay, you can leave now. And so you can depart in peace. And so what I think is kind of interesting about this is that, first of all, well, like what are these angels other than sort of this charming story from the Talmud? Like, what does that actually mean? That there are angels that might come to our home? Like, I'm personally not so aware of any like angelic beings like coming into my home on a Friday night, even though I'm evoking them. And also, why are we asking them to leave? What is that about? Like, why do we want them to, like, okay, I get, come in, bless me with peace, but what is it about leaving? So to answer that, we want to take a look at a little bit into the world of Jewish mysticism, and to say that that angels have different forms. There's different ways of talking about angels. One of the places that we see this in, for example, in our liturgy in El Adon, which is one of the big, it's a piyut, a liturgical poem that's part of the Shabbat morning liturgy, and it talks about Srafim and Ofanim and Chayot HaKodesh. So there's all different kinds of names of angels, different kinds of these beings that exist in different realms. So if we're going to look at then the Jewish mystical world talks about these 4 worlds, which is really just about talking about 4 different aspects of experience. So the bottom level of experience is the world of Asiyah, the world of making. And this is the physical world. It's the world of the body. It's the world of action. It's the world of doing. It's the place that our culture has the greatest emphasis on, the world of doing, of accomplishing, of being in our bodies. The next level up, well, I don't know if it's really up, that might be the next level in, is the world of Yetzirah, which is the world of formation. And this is actually the world of emotions. So as we experience the world through our emotions, we're living in that, the realm of Yetzirah. The next level of experience is Bri'ah, which means creation. And this is the world of the mind. This is the world of the intellect. This is the world of our thoughts. This is the world of ideas. This is the world of thinking about things. And then finally, the highest or the deepest world is called Atzilut. Atzilut, for those of you who are familiar with Hebrew, the root of it is etzel. It's like right up against, right next to divinity itself. So this is sort of like the place of where divinity starts emanating out. And it's the world of absolute oneness, where there's not a lot of distinction or separateness or individuation. It's the world of profound oneness. And another way of talking about that is the world of the soul. So what's interesting is that each of these worlds has a different kind of angel that inhabits it. And the word that's used for angel in Shalom Aleichem is malach. Malach means messenger. And the world of the malachim, of the messengers, is the world of Yetzirah. It's the world of the emotions. Now that I think is super, super interesting, because what it's saying then is that our emotions we can think of our emotions as angelic messengers. And this is a place where I think Jewish mysticism and contemporary psychology really overlap with each other. Because one of the ways that we really can experience emotions, one of the ways that we can think about emotions, is that our emotions have messages for us. And the messages for us are really, really important about what our needs are, how peaceful we feel in the world, how our well-being is actually unfolding or not unfolding. And the way that we know that often is through our emotions. Now, I have to say that often it's extremely difficult to connect into our emotions. And I think the biggest obstacle that stands between us and those angelic messages that come to us is trauma. So, and I wanted to say one other piece about this, which is that it has to do with this world of Atzilut, that oneness in the mystical tradition. Another way of thinking about it is the life force itself. The life force itself that is like spinning out. You can see the picture from the new telescope, that's out in space, the Webb telescope that looks at space in these new amazing ways. That the universe unfolding out through time is another way of thinking about another sort of mystical way of connecting in with divinity itself. And so that flows through us, that communicates to us through our emotions. And the thing that gets in the way of us really hearing those messages is trauma. So let's turn a little bit into the world of trauma. And I want to say that the education that I've had in the world of trauma is through this approach that's called NARM, N-A-R-M, which stands for Neuroaffective Relational Model. That's a mouthful. We can talk later if you're interested in what that actually means. It's a process that was developed by Lawrence Heller. And at the bottom of this slide, there's this book that just came out with Larry Heller and Brad Kammer, who's a senior trainer of NARM. That's called The Practical Guide for Healing Developmental Trauma. And this is really where I've received my education about trauma primarily. And a lot of what I'm going to be sharing with you is derived from them. So first of all, I just want to say there are two different ways that we talk about trauma. And most of the time when we talk about trauma, if people know about it, we're familiar a little bit with PTSD, with post-traumatic stress disorder. And PTSD is something that happens when we've experienced a particular kind of what we call shock trauma. So shock trauma is when there's been a terrible event that's happened to us. And a car accident, an event of violence, like something that's been terrible, and but it's a particular event that happened, and then it's over. But what happens with trauma is that the body doesn't actually know that the event is over, and what happens is fear gets frozen in the body in particular ways. There's a lot of amazing literature about this. The Body Keeps the Score is one of the most important books about this. That really was one of the first books that opened up this idea of how how fear stays in the body, in the nervous system, and then causes particular symptoms such as re-experiencing the trauma, like flashbacks or nightmares, avoidance behaviors, like really trying to protect ourselves, and sort of this ongoing sense of threat where we don't ever really feel safe. So those are some of the symptoms of shock trauma where you can feel the fear that's stuck in the body. Complex trauma, on the other hand, or CPTSD, is different. So complex trauma takes place over a longer period of time. And instead of having it be one event that then has fear frozen in the body, it's something that happens over a longer period of time. And instead of fear, it's about shame, where we feel it's more relationally based. It has to do with feeling bad about who we are and all the ways that we then try and compensate or create strategies around how to deal with that sense of shame. And we're going to get more into this in just a moment. But and complex trauma in addition to some of the symptoms of shock trauma, also include interpersonal difficulties where our relationships don't work as well as we would like them to, a negative self-concept, meaning that we feel terrible about ourselves. We even may hate ourselves on a particular level, and affect dysregulation, which means that we don't have control over our emotions, that our emotions control us. And not just fear, but emotions such as anger, and sadness, depression, like other kinds of things like that. So I wanted to say a few words about optimal development as we start exploring a little bit about what developmental trauma then might look like. To say that, well, so first of all, developmental trauma looks a little bit different at different stages depending on when our basic needs are not met. But optimal development means that we come into this world a vulnerable child who is 100% dependent on our environment to take care of us, whether that's our parents or whether that's the family that we're born into or the larger environment. And if everything goes according to plan, which unfortunately it rarely does, we go through different developmental stages of coming into a full human being that feels connected to ourselves and to others. We have the capacity to connect with ourselves and with others, to be able to articulate what we need in this world, to be able to trust that the world around us is okay and it's safe and that we can flourish in it, that we have a sense of autonomy in ourselves, that we can determine for ourselves the kind of person that we want to be, and that we can open our hearts towards love and eventually into a sexual or intimate relationship that is supportive and loving and mutual, and that we can really come into our fullness. In fact, it could even be sort of that shalom that we are talking about, asking the angels to bless us with on Shabbat. And in fact, I think often Shabbat is sort of a model to be held up as to what might optimal development look like if it were possible. So when a child is born, the first developmental task that a child has to do is to come into life as an embodied human being, to come into this existence in a body and to be able to connect with themselves and with their environment. But unfortunately, all kinds of terrible things can get in the way. And these are just some of the things that can happen that we call environmental failure that prevent this developmental stage from happening. So I just want to say a few words about some of these things. So intergenerational trauma is something that I think is particularly relevant to the Jewish community, that both in terms of biologically and environmental impact. So for example, you may be familiar with some of the work of Rachel Yehuda, who started out studying what happens what happens genetically with children and grandchildren of Holocaust survivors, and really is one of the people who's developing this new field of epigenetics that, and this is like a little bit beyond my understanding, is like, I'm a rabbi, I'm not a biologist, but the way that I understand is that there's something about the way that our stress hormones are turned off and on, and the way that gets our genetics allow the stress hormones to be turned on or off in subsequent generations, that then have a significant impact on stress in the body and our ability to metabolize it or not metabolize it. So already just coming in and being born with some of these these inheritances is already significant. And of course, if there is intergenerational trauma, that means that parents can only give what they've learned themselves. And so if they were not raised in an environment of optimal development where they were really well taken care of and could go through all these stages, there's only so much that they can offer for their children. I just want to say at this point, and this is a really, really important point, that there are one of the things that's so exciting about this field of trauma healing is that there are interventions that can be made. So this isn't like, okay, you're the child of a Holocaust survivor, and that means you're doomed to have an environmental failure for the rest of your life. We actually know that that's not true. There is both through our nervous systems and through the way that what we believe about ourselves, we can make adjustments to come to a place of greater healing, even with some of the biological things that we inherit. So, so some of these other things that you can see on the page, you can see how they might have a significant impact on a child whose job it is to connect with themselves and with others. Let's say it's a difficult birth, and that's not blaming anybody, right? Difficult births happen as part of the human experience. It's nobody's fault. But the child's experience of that is one of, oh my gosh, I'm coming into this body, but it's painful to come into this body. And I don't know what I'm like. I want to connect, but I can't connect. And so the child has to adjust to that in a particular way. If there's a parent that is that's missing, and again, not blaming anyone, we know parents die, or parents are in prison, or all parents are ill, whatever happens to happen, that for very, very good reasons, that the child doesn't get the ongoing attention and response to the needs that the child might have. But it has an impact on the child, just as it has on the rest of the family. So I don't think I'll talk about all of these different things, but you can see how in each of these things, then it makes it more difficult for the child to be able to thrive. So this is a quote by Gabor Mate, who's also very significant in this emerging trauma healing field, where he says that people have two basic needs, like children have two basic needs. And those needs are attachment and authenticity. And when authenticity threatens attachment, attachment trumps authenticity every time. Okay, so what does that mean? So let's say that I am a newborn baby, and let's say I had a really difficult birth. Actually, I'll use my own example, actually. So when I was born, my mother had a really difficult time, and I was delivered with forceps. And I actually have a scratch on my eye that whenever I go to the eye doctor's like, ooh, where did you get that? And I say, okay, so when I was born, that happened. So a child has, like, the life force in a child the child will protest when something is not according to their needs. Usually that's crying. Usually that's like some kind of a protest. If that protest is not met, then that leads the child to a place of rage. And if the rage is not responded to, then the child can go into a place of grief and just shutting down a particular part of their desire to connect. It's too much for the nervous system. And the child has to 100% depend on the environment to take care of them. That's this attachment. The child is 100% dependent on that. So this leads to this really impossible dilemma. I need to connect to myself and others, but it's too painful to. So in that case, the attachment, connecting, is going to take precedence over my own feelings of rage, of grief, of protest, of all the things that are wrong. And so I start shutting down. I start being resigned. This is just the way that life is. This is this life that I am coming into. The other thing that children do in this situation that we're programmed to do because we are dependent on the attachment is that we internalize and we personalize the situation around us. So if the situation around me is bad, what the child internalizes is I must be bad. The child doesn't have the words or anything to be able to say, oh, this is just a bad situation. It's a bad situation that I had to be delivered with forceps. The child unconsciously in the nervous system says, I'm the one who's bad. I somehow don't deserve to be part of this life. I did something, obviously there's no words for this with an infant, but an infant will internalize this anyway and start shaming themselves as a way of protecting that attachment connection. It's not the environment that's bad. It's not the parent that's bad. It's not the world that's bad. I'm bad. And this is the shame that is indicative of this developmental trauma. And the shame is a terrible thing, but it's also a life-saving strategy. It is a life-saving strategy because it allows the child to keep that attachment to the environment which they need to survive. And so as we get older, we develop particular strategies that are based on this shame that we feel. So I'm going to give you a couple of examples. So these are things that we believe about ourselves or about the world that are based on this shame. And of course, the flip side of shame is pride. So sometimes that happens too. So the shame is, I never really belong anywhere. I'm the one who's always on the outside. Like nobody really cares about me. I'm not really, I don't really belong. Or on the flip side, well, forget all of you. I don't want to be around you anyway. I'm going to sit here with my books, with myself, and I'm just going to do things on my own. And I think this is really interesting, particularly when it comes like that intergenerational trauma into the Jewish world, because one of these strategies is moving out of the body into either the intellectual and being really, really smart and living in our heads as being brilliantly intellectual, or alternatively into the spiritual, even beyond the head, into the world beyond. And so these are strategies that help us survive that early pain of having to, of not being able to connect, of having the experience of connection being really painful. Another kind of these strategies is the sense of, well, nobody responded to my needs. I'm a baby, I'm like crying and crying and crying, and nobody's paying attention to me. And so what I learn is I don't deserve to have my own needs taken care of, but I can take care of everyone else around me. And that's going to be my strategy to find a place for myself, because deep down, I don't believe that I have the right to have my own needs and to have my own needs being taken care of. Or I need to prove my worth because I don't believe that I am worthy in and of it myself. And so I'm going to prove my worth by overachieving. And I'm going to be the A student, and I'm going to get into the Ivy League school, and I'm going to have the brilliant career, and I'm going to be the best in my job, and I'm going to do all this because that's the way that I'm going to prove that I am worthwhile being in this world. And I put pressure on myself to always know more, to do more, to be better, to improve, to like achieve more and more and more. And I chose these survival strategies. These are all trauma responses because I see so much of this in the Jewish community. I see it in myself, and I see it so much in the Jewish community. And I want to say that these strategies saved our lives. And like both as individuals, often in our families, but also as Jews. Like we've used these as a way of surviving in a world that was not so interested in us being here very often. And they've served us really well also. These strategies are not something that we necessarily want to get rid of, but they also really get in the way. They really get in the way of us being able to connect in, even know what our heart's desire truly is. It was one of the things I was really struck with over the High Holy Day liturgy just recently, is how often that phrase, our heart's desire, is part of our liturgy. And all of the petitions that we are bringing before God, that please fulfill our heart's desires for the good. And these strategies get in the way of us actually being able to do that, because they become the glasses through which we see the world. We don't even know that these are beliefs. We believe, well, this is just the way that it is. This is just the way that it is. But I'm here to tell you that it's not. That the life force, the chiyut, which is another way of talking about God, about divinity, about healing, about the yearning to be fully in this world, fully alive, fully ourselves, fully that authentic peace, that is always in us, no matter how much we've gone through, no matter how much we shame ourselves, no matter how much we think that we're bad, no matter how much we think it's always going to be this way, the life force flows with us always and moves us towards greater healing. And one of the ways, there are many aspects of the healing, but one of the ways is to start noticing and building greater capacity for those feelings that I mentioned before that the child feels, the protest, the rage, the grief, that was too much for the nervous system of a child, that is actually not too much for the adult, or the adult has the capacity to build capacity to hold those feelings. So very often we use our strategies when those feelings start coming up and we don't know what to do with those feelings, particularly anger and sadness. Particularly anger and sadness. And I also just want to say that this is a very interesting thing to look at, because often families have systems where anger might be allowed, but sadness is not. And so when we're feeling actually a lot of grief or something, we come in as being very irritated and angry, but underneath that anger might be a great deal of grief and sadness, or the other way around, where the default is to be sad and to shut down and to feel depressed, or anxious even, but underneath it is a ton of anger that needs to be expressed. And so we can, through different modalities, we can come to be able to hold and to host our feelings, those underlying states, to be able to express them, to hear their messages, so that we can learn from them, and then we don't have to resort to those strategies automatically. We can choose them if we want them, but we don't need them, because we can hold our feelings differently than we could when we were a child. So from here then, I want to come back to Shalom Aleichem and to show how Shalom Aleichem can be a model for healing some of this developmental trauma and for dealing with these strategies that are that get in the way of us being able to really come to our heart's desire. So the messengers, these angels, are messengers from the life force itself, from the divine inside of us that is taking form in this human life, in this bodily incarnation through each of us. And the messengers take the form of feelings. Remember, we said that they come, that the tradition says that these malachim come from the world of Yetzirah, from the world of emotions. So these messengers These feelings come to us, even in unpleasant feelings, even that could be dangerous feelings like anger or sadness, that when we were younger threatened that attachment bond. And so we weren't able to listen to them. And we developed all these different strategies instead. But as we come into our full adult consciousness, we can have the space to say, yes, peace be upon you, messengers. Peace be upon you, difficult emotions. Come in. Come in. I have space for you. I can hold you. I can greet you. And then, most importantly, I can ask you to bless me. Because these feelings are there with important messages that we need to hear. And when we hear them, it brings greater blessing, greater goodness, greater information, greater our own authenticity, which in some ways really is one of the greatest blessings that we have. And then once we've received the message, we've received the blessing, we can ask them to leave. We don't need these emotions to stay, and they don't have to stay. They've delivered their message and they can depart. And they can leave us in a place of greater peace, greater wholeness, greater goodness, greater thriving, greater in a place of being able to recognize and realize our heart's desire, greater connection to ourselves, to God, and to each other. All right, so I'm going to pause here. I'm going to stop sharing.
Awesome. Love this, Rabbi Goldstein. Thank you so much. So awesome. Friends, we'd love to hear from you if you have questions to ask.
Please, comments, questions.
Feel free to unmute yourself or to write in the chat if you wish.
Yes, Esther. Make sure you unmute yourself so we can hear you.
I don't know if you remember me, but
I do remember you. Absolutely. It's wonderful to see you.
my name was Carol when I knew you.
Yes.
And I just was deeply moved by your what you said, or your metaphor, the angelic messengers that come to us. And to be succinct, I have repaired and healed from intergenerational early childhood trauma. And I just don't know if this is of interest, but I've worked very closely with many different people, you know, Gabor Mate and Peter Levine and Bessel and wonderful crew. And a person I particularly wanted to just offer the thought, if it's useful. I've worked very closely with Daniel Siegel from the Mindsight Institute. And his books, there are many different books. He's an attachment, his early work was attachment, he's an attachment researcher. And some of his books, and the ones that I've been particularly aware of, The Whole Brain Child, and Parenting from the Inside Out, you're probably very familiar with them. But I just, things you said were so conciliant with the thinking that I've learned for the last 15, 20 years from Dan. It was very moving for me.
Thank you so much. And I'm so glad that you are mentioning these names, and you might want to put them in the chat so that people can look at them. I mean, this field of trauma, shock trauma and developmental trauma healing is really new. And there are amazing pioneers who are doing extraordinary work. And it's so hopeful. It's so hopeful because it means that, you know, like you, we can heal from these things. We really can. So I think it would be great if you would put
Well,
some of that
I
in the
think
chat.
one of the most beautiful things I'll end with, which are not my words, they're Dan Siegel's words, but I've now used them I've started writing my story. Repair is possible at any time.
That's right. Amen. Amen. And what a miracle that is. And it is true. Yeah.
And now the science is coming together with our angels of messenger, our Shalom Aleichem. That's where you so touched me today, because the science of neuroplasticity.
Exactly.
Now it's like the ancient messengers of our angels, of our God, of Hashem. The neuroscientists are now showing us the ancient wisdom is profound.
Exactly. Exactly. Amazing. Thank you so much. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I think Sarah was next and then Aglaia.
Beautiful.
So I guess a lot of my training was from Marshall Rosenberg with the Center for Nonviolent Communication.
Yeah.
And what I don't hear in the connecting to the feelings and getting to message is connecting deeply to needs, and the needs that we are trying, whether successfully or unsuccessfully, to meet by our actions, and how important that's been for me in understanding others, as well as being able to be compassionate with myself and understanding how to move forward. So I'm wondering whether you could address needs and the component of needs in all of this.
Absolutely. Yes. Thank you. It's a great question. And I really admire the work that you're doing. I think it's really extremely impactful. And the whole, from what I understand, you can correct me if I'm wrong, the idea of like, what is it that I need and what is it that you need? And it might take a different form than like the agenda that we thought we were bringing to the table, but we really want to focus on like what are our needs and making sure our needs get met.
Well, and often just that our needs are often exactly the same, because there are only so many human needs, but we're looking at them from our own very narrow viewpoint and not recognizing there are thousands of strategies to meet these needs, and that our needs can be met. And if they can't, then we come back to the table and find a new strategy.
Yeah. So I think what this approach towards developmental trauma would say about needs is actually one of the developmental stages. The second developmental stage is about being able to express our needs. And so this developmental stage from about birth to about 6 months old is about developing the capacity to know that I have needs, and in the case of optimal development, that my needs will be met and that I have a right to ask for my needs. And so when that is disrupted through developmental trauma, then we shut down our ability to have needs. And so I think that's one of the things that then ends up getting really complicated. It's like if we can say what our needs are, then we can do the amazing work that you're doing. But if we don't, if we shame ourselves and believe that we actually don't have needs, or the only way that our needs can be met is by taking care of everybody else's needs, that's a really powerful strategy that people develop when that level of development is not adequately supported. And so, in fact, when I do a NARM session with somebody, the first question I always ask is, what would you like for yourself out of our time together today? And I have to tell you, the vast majority of people do not know how to answer that question, because we are so detached from what our own needs are. And part of the process then is just a curious exploration of like what's getting in the way of me knowing what my needs actually are. Yeah, so that's very, very important. Thank you for raising the issue of needs.
Thank you. Aglaia?
Okay, I don't know if this is going to be helpful for anyone though, but speaking of, angelic messengers and stuff like that, it does happen. Because in my experience, it was, I go through off and on time periods when I'm reading the Torah and stuff like that. And when I'm reading the Torah a lot, it does weird things to me. Like my mind opens in a lot of ways. So you were talking about the person who retreats, moves out of the body and into intellect and everything.
Mhm.
Well, okay, so this was a few months ago, but I was driving along and I was remembering something that I had told people that I had read Les Miserables, like, the whole book and everything. And I thought about all these other, like, books that I've read and everything. And I thought, okay, so why did I read a 1,400-page book? And all of a sudden, like, this answer came to me, like, well, why do people shoot heroin? And I was like, what? But then I was like, that is exactly what the answer is. Like, it's basically, so I will say this though, because I don't want to talk about me too much though, but long story short though, it will work. It's going to work in a lot of whack ways that you're not expecting. And you have to be open for the whack ways that you're not expecting.
I think that last piece is I love that so much, because like one of the things that I often find in both the trauma healing work and in spiritual work is that it's surprising.
Yeah.
It's not what you expect.
Mhm.
And I think that if we can allow ourselves to be in a greater state of curiosity, which
Mhm.
means not knowing all the answers up front, then we can learn.
Mhm.
And that's very hard for many people.
Mhm.
So yeah. Yeah, I'm noticing some things in the chat, and I can't talk and read the chat at the same time. So I just want to turn to that for just a moment. Yes, Saul, thank you. Les Mis is legal in most states. Thank you. And Esther, thank you for those great resources. Yeah, so then
Les Mis is also less expensive than heroin.
Yes. Yes. Yeah. Yeah. So I really want to resonate with sort of this accept, embrace, and release the emotions associated. And it's not even necessarily associated with the trauma. It's like, what's happening right now? What is the feeling that's coming up in me now? Which is shaped by what happened in the past, because that's how I develop the patterns of how I relate to it. But moment to moment, because there is a mindfulness part of this as well. Mindfulness is very, very helpful. So there was a question of what is the developmental model that I'm referring to. So, and there was a question about Erik Erikson, other developmental psychologists. So NARM is based on the work of Wilhelm Reich and his different levels of development. Although NARM is, Wilhelm Reich layers, stages of development are pretty pathologizing. NARM tends not to be as pathologizing, which is one of the things I like about it. Yes, and a lot of mindfulness and Jewish mindfulness practices. Yeah, beautiful. Yeah, Baruch.
Thank you so much, Rabbi Lisa, for, Shalom Aleichem, the song and the traditional melody. I often think that traditional melody is one of the most beautiful ever, and I use it almost every Shabbat, sometimes in leading services, and I often wonder about how to make that strange poetry meaningful to myself and to others, and you've really given me a lot there. Just a couple thoughts. One, when you were talking about the decision of a young child that who's not able to get their needs met, that I have done something wrong, or that when there's environmental trauma, that I have done something wrong, and it just really brought up for me the Jewish national response to the Babylonian exile or the destruction of the temple, and the prophet saying, it's because we were bad.
That's right.
And so we have that kind of trauma kind of built into our creation myth, and so I wonder how you feel we need to deal with that as a people. And then the other question I had was, these overachieving and the intellectual achievements and so forth that we bring as responses to these unpleasant realities are actually wonderful in a lot of ways, and we wouldn't want to lose those. So is there a danger of that if we have I forget what you call it, but optimal, if we could bring optimal development to all Jewish children, for example. So
beautiful. Shamati, thank you. So I actually think that there's so much about Jewish tradition that has developed as a response to the traumas of our past. So much of it. And I would even think that some of the ways in which we put so much pressure on ourselves. Like I've been in the world of Jewish education for like over 30 years. I have never met a Jewish person who isn't a little bit ashamed that they don't know more, and that other people know more, and that they should know more. And like that is as far as I know, that is a universal experience. And I think that the kind of judgment and pressure that we put on ourselves and others about how observant we are, how much we know, or how like all of that, I think the roots of that are a trauma response. That if we only knew more, if we could only justify ourselves more, if we could only be more, then these terrible things would not have happened to us. And as you say, like that's actually written into our liturgy, right? Because of our sins, our temple was destroyed. Like that's the Musaf liturgy. So I feel a tremendous amount of compassion for us and our ancestors when I see this, that this was the ways that we knew how to survive. And it worked. As you're saying, like these strategies have worked in so many ways. The difficulty is the suffering that they bring us and others for that matter. And I think that as we go through the healing process, what happens is we realize that there are different ways of seeing. So we might want to see things through the lens of the strategy, that if I really push myself, I'm going to get someplace that I wouldn't get to if I didn't push myself. But I have that strategy in my back pocket. It's not the only way that I know how to relate to myself in the world. And I can take it off, say on Shabbat, and just like really relax into being blessed by this environment of good food and loving company, and not feel like I have to do anything for it to be anything other than it just is. So we don't want to get rid of the strategies. We don't want to get rid of anything. I mean, part of the trauma is shutting off a part of ourselves. So we want to invite everybody to the Shabbat table. The strategies, the child consciousness, the adult consciousness, the shames, all of it is welcome. And that is truly, that is healing.
Thank you.
I see Lauren had her hand up.
My question is, to me, it's so obvious. I mean, I'm a child of a Holocaust survivor, grew up. I'm from Toronto, is mostly a survivor community. My nephew feels that he's also experiencing some kind of intergenerational trauma, and yet he's the next gen. Many Mizrahim who came here, I mean, they fled with like one suitcase, and it was very difficult. How can we stop this intergenerational trauma? You know, it's, and living in Israel, oh my God, everybody there is traumatized, and I don't see any way of getting around it. But what can we have in place so that the next generations don't have to live with all this anxiety and depression?
Yeah. It's such a great and important question. And I think that part of what we have to do is to do our own healing work. And really, each one of us looking at ourselves to see where do these patterns manifest in us? How can we bring healing to our own families? And I think that we're just at the beginning point to think about this specifically in a Jewish context. You know, I think that for a long time, there was sort of like, no, we're okay, everything's together, and we're just going to like move forward. And I think one of the things that's been happening over the past maybe 5-10 years is realizing, well, actually, we might not be so okay as we thought. And as you know, anti-Semitism is reawakening, and we notice some of the existential fear that also arises, that we realize, oh, actually, we have work to do. So this is something that I'm very, very interested in. I'm really interested in looking at not just like I'm very interested in being a practitioner one-on-one, but I'm also interested in thinking about like how can we bring this more into the educational realm, into our communities. Like that work also has to happen. And I'm not the only person who's interested in this, thank goodness. I'm actually, you know, there are many people, and not surprisingly, many of the people who are pioneers in the field are themselves Jews, which, you know, is not so surprising. There are other peoples also, obviously, you know, the trauma is not a Jewish, you know, I think every group has some kind of a trauma, because we live in a world that is really based on, like if you go far enough back, there's plenty of trauma to go around for all of us.
Thank you so much. We're right about at our time. If there are no other questions, then I will thank Rabbi Lisa Goldstein so much for being here. It was great to learn with you. And of course, I want to thank you all for attending and learning with us. And I want to let everybody know about some events we have coming up. Next week, next Thursday, October 27th, we have Rabbi David Wolpe coming in. So the lecture will be available in person and virtually. So that is at 7 p.m. Pacific for the lecture for both in person and on Zoom. And then on November 3rd, we have Rabbi Joseph Ozarowski, I hope I'm saying his name right, at 1 p.m. Pacific virtually for his class on Nadav and Avihu, a pastoral study in bereavement. So hope that we will see you there, and hope you have a great rest of your day. Thanks again for being here.
Thank you, everyone. It's a really delight to be with you all.